Welcome to This Explainer. You know, as managers, HR professionals, and organizational leaders, we spend a literally incredible amount of time dissecting the psychology of our workforce. We're always talking endlessly about boomers and millennials, right? And we analyze Gen Z like they're some fascinating new species. But sitting right there, smack in the middle of our org charts, is this almost invisible demographic. Generation X, born roughly between 1965 and 1980. These are your seasoned directors who just never complain. The folks who quietly built the internet, but, they aren't posting about their breakfast online. So today, we're going to empower you to truly understand and support this amazing demographic.
Which brings us to the big question we're answering today. Why is the most capable generation also the absolute most misunderstood? Seriously, the psychology of Gen X is probably the most misunderstood of any living generation on your team right now. But here's the thing. Their unique psychological traits represent massive, untapped organizational potential. If we can just understand the world that shaped them, we can entirely rethink our management approach and really unlock their incredible resilience and capability. Okay, let's dive into our roadmap for today's explainer. First up, we'll look at latchkey leaders. Second, trust and authority. Third, deep encoding. And finally, we'll wrap up with a management playbook.
Section 1. Latchkey kids turned leaders, the roots of autonomy.
To really understand the Gen X employee sitting across from you today, we've got to transport ourselves back to 1978. Just picture this for a second. You're 8 years old and you come home to an entirely empty house because both of your parents are working. There are no smartphones, there are no Ring cameras, none of that. In fact, data published in the American Journal of Orthopsychiatry found that by 1984, roughly 7 million kids between the ages of 5 and 13 were regularly unsupervised after school. 7 million! That empty house did way more than just make them self-reliant. It fundamentally taught an entire generation that you simply can't always count on someone being there, which literally forced them to solve problems completely independently.
Notice how that childhood environment translates straight into the workplace. Psychologists actually call that empty house a high-contingency environment. Because parents weren't there to mediate, actions and outcomes were directly linked, no buffer time. If they stepped out of line, the rules hit hard and fast. Their brains learned to predict consequences in real time. And this is exactly why your Gen X leaders tend to think 3 steps ahead. They anticipate operational outcomes in ways that honestly baffle younger generations.
Now, consider the stark contrast we see today. We've moved from the totally unmonitored youth of empty houses and real-time consequences to this modern era of constant supervision, helicopter parenting, and digital tracking. Because Gen X grew up in a time when true privacy was just the norm, they have a really deep-seated preference for workplace autonomy today. The idea of blasting their lives out for strangers or being constantly monitored at work, that doesn't feel exciting to them at all. It feels risky. To them, the less people know about you, the safer you are. Section 2. Crises, Authority, and Trust. The Armor of Skepticism.
So how did those formative years build such specific armor against corporate authority? Well, as kids, they watched incompetent authority figures make terrible decisions, from Watergate to Iran-Contra. They literally sat under their desks for Cold War nuclear drills. Then, as adults, the youngest Gen Xers graduated college right into the dot-com bubble bursting, and the oldest ones hit their stride just as the 2008 financial crisis completely decimated the economy. They have been repeatedly economically traumatized. They watched their parents give their absolute all to companies, only to get pink slips during corporate restructuring. This whole sequence of historical traumas taught them that institutions are inherently fragile, and that is exactly what drives their modern desire for intense job security and multiple income streams.
Because the rules kept changing right in front of them, they developed what psychologists call defensive pessimism. It's basically emotional armor, built to expect the worst while hoping for the best. Now, younger generations might look at this and perceive it as cynicism. But actually, scratch that. For Gen X, it's just being realistic. They cross their fingers for good things at your company, for sure. But deep down, they kind of expect the rug to get pulled out, because that is what historically kept happening to them.
So how does all this impact their loyalty to your organization? Well, the truth is, they don't really believe in company loyalty, but they are fiercely loyal to actual competence. They have zero patience for empty hierarchy. If you are just someone with a fancy job title who doesn't actually know what you're doing, you will lose them. But if you have earned your position through actual, demonstrable skill, they will respect you and they'll follow you anywhere.
Section 3. Deep Encoding and Competence, the Information Shift.
This brings us to their super unique approach to problem solving. Generation X processed information completely differently than we do today. Before the internet, knowledge had a physical weight and a physical cost. Think about it. They spent hours in libraries hunting through card catalog drawers just to find a single book that might contain the answer. Compare that immense manual effort, cost, and time to today's instant retrieval, where we just Google the answer in 2 seconds.
Because information required so much effort to obtain back then, they valued it differently. Cognitive psychologists describe this phenomenon as deeper encoding. When you work hard to find an answer, it becomes more permanently integrated into your memory. This cognitive shift is exactly why your Gen X employees are highly competent, deep knowledge workers. They retain vast amounts of structural knowledge, and crucially, they don't need instant external validation for knowing it.
This deeper encoding also birthed a really hands-on resourcefulness. When a bike chain slipped or a TV flickered in the 1980s, you didn't call a technician and you couldn't pull up a tutorial. You flipped the bike upside down, got grease on your hands, and you figured it out. This built an incredible mechanical intuition. It's his core belief that with enough patience and a metaphorical screwdriver, you can master any physical or operational problem.
Section 4. Management Playbook, Leading the Resilient Generation. So, the crucial point is, how do we actually use all of this psychological data to empower this uniquely resilient generation? Let's start with giving feedback. You have to remember their latchkey roots and their baseline assumption that high visibility equals vulnerability. When you give them feedback, focus strictly on their competence. Skip the micromanagement completely. I mean it. They absolutely hate it. Keep your praise and your critiques private. Avoid that flashy, public, social media-style praise in company-wide Slack channels or all-hands meetings. To a generation that learns safety means flying under the radar, public exposure feels inherently unsafe.
When a crisis hits your department, here's your simple 3-step procedure to activate that mechanical intuition we talked about. Step 1, present the crisis clearly. Step 2, step back completely. Step 3, let them solve it independently. Look, they have been figuring things out on their own since they were 8 years old. If you just give them the space, they will be the most valuable people in the room during a corporate fire drill.
However, as a manager, you really need to be aware of a critical blind spot here. Research published in the Journal of Adult Development shows that Gen Xers report significantly lower levels of seeking social support during stressful periods compared to other generations. It's not that they don't have people to ask. It's that asking for help kind of feels like admitting defeat. They have this self-reliance that almost borders on anxiety. You have got to proactively check in, because they will likely suffer in silence rather than raise their hand for a lifeline.
When navigating modern workplace dynamics, you need to align with their boundaries to build trust. While modern corporate norms love to push for public praise, forced vulnerability, and strict hierarchy, Gen X strongly prefers quiet collaboration, using irony as a protective shield to keep things at arm's length and relying strictly on earned respect. If you can foster an environment that respects these boundaries rather than forcing them into these highly visible modern corporate molds, you will absolutely gain their unwavering dedication.
Ultimately, Generation X might be the last generation that truly understands what it means to be alone with their thoughts, to be bored, and to solve complex problems without a search engine. As this quote beautifully summarizes, they are the bridge generation. They were shaped by a unique moment in history when the old analog world was dying and the new digital one hadn't quite been born. They are literally the structural integrity of your organization, quietly holding things together, driving resilience during organizational change, and expecting absolutely nothing in return.
So I leave you with this final, provocative thought. Knowing everything we've just uncovered about their psychology, how will you empower the bridge generation on your team tomorrow? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. If this organizational deep dive hit home for you, please hit subscribe and be sure to check out our other explainers to keep empowering your leadership journey. See you next time.